Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I am your host, Chris Shang, and today we are guested by Robert Rose, who's the Chief Strategy Officer from the Content Advisory. Thank you for joining us today. Robert, how are you?
I am doing very well. Thanks so much. I'm really glad, great to be here.
Of course, thank you. Tell us a little bit about Content Advisory and what your role is there.
Sure. Well, these days, what I'm primarily doing is, what we would call fractional marketing leadership, which is working with technology companies and media companies for the most part, helping them sort through the world of digital marketing, and that includes startups and mid-sized and even larger organizations where we're working as a advisor and fractional marketing, sort of resource to help these companies grow and maintain and really thrive in today's modern marketplace. And that whole thing was born out of all the work that I've been doing in marketing for the last 25 years, in startups and in media companies and all those kinds of things. So yeah, that's what we're doing these days.
Got it. Let's go back then to back in the day and some of your previous chapters of your career, because I think that's
Sure.
an interesting start. But why marketing in the first place? How'd you get involved into it? Was it something you always knew you wanted to do, or was there some haphazard path to marketing?
The latter,
Yeah,
as, as
usually
as I'm
usually
sure.
is. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
As I'm
I'm just
sure
curious what it is.
most of your guests,
Yeah,
yeah, all of us marketers have some sort of haphazard way of getting here. Um, yeah, like I was talking about 30 years ago now. I came out to Los Angeles and I was going to be a rock star. And that turned out about as well as you think it might. And quickly discovered that I needed to pay rent. And the interesting thing is, I joined to Showtime Television, the TV network, and which is when back when cable was still a thing, right? This is pre-internet, and I learned about marketing, sort of really immersed myself in every single thing I could get my hands on because I fell in love. I fell in love with the practice. I fell in love with everything about it. And it sort of really mixed everything that I loved doing, which was writing, creating, multimedia, getting on stage, talking, working. All those things were really just sort of my passions. And I just realized that marketing was a great way to encapsulate all that. Um, and then what happened was, as I started, really loving that, of course, we all went through the dot-com boom of the early 2000s, and I found myself the CMO. Other than a quick stint that I did, sort of doing consulting work, building giant websites for companies, I found myself the CMO of a startup technology company, enterprise technology company that some friends of mine we started and did very well. Basically, did the whole 2 rounds of Silicon Valley funding, did the whole thing, built a marketing team of 70 people, and took a new approach to it, which was really the idea of saying, listen, I can teach all these guys marketing, but what I can't teach them to be is great communicators. And we were really looking at this idea to say, can we create a little media company within, because I came from TV and it was what I knew. Could we create a little media company within this, technology company and drive value and drive leads and drive success? And yeah, it worked. And all of a sudden we started getting business and we started getting our brand out there. The startup went to, we went up to tens of millions of dollars in revenue. And then all of a sudden I discovered it kind of had a name. My friend of mine by the name of Joe Polizzi had started this thing called Content Marketing Institute, and he had written a book. And so I went, hey, this thing that I'm doing, it's got a name. So I hunted Joe down and he and I started working together and then leaned into this whole thing called content marketing, which was really a strategy, in the early days, 2008, 2009. And we started another company called the Content Marketing Institute. And I did that for about 7.5 years until it got, another successful exit, successfully got acquired. And since then, I've been out on my own, sort of working as in marketing, mostly on the content strategy, content marketing space in terms of the niche I sort of follow, but really broadly focused on marketing for all kinds of companies.
yeah, awesome. Thank you for giving that lengthy explanation. In your mind, I mean, coming from like, I mean, I feel like content marketing too is like it's making a comeback, right? It's like becoming even more relevant especially for earlier stage companies, has become more mission critical, I think, to center yourself around content, community, some of these things that we're cycling back to that you just mentioned. Are you seeing any of that now, or is that just kind of you've been so focused in that world that you kind of just you already kind of expected that that's what the play out was going to be?
Yeah, well, I think the switch, to the extent that it's making a comeback, is, one of the things that our hypothesis early on was that at some point content marketing would just become part of marketing, right? Doing good content marketing would just become part of an overall broader marketing strategy. What we didn't count on, and I think has actually happened, and maybe I have a bit of a bias here, but what I believe is kind of the other way around, is kind of everything that we used to do, 10, 15 years ago in content marketing has really become the core of what we do in marketing. And then this is especially true for startup companies. Really, it's around how do we build value with the experiences that we're creating, from our website to our blog to our social media presence to all the things, our events, all the things that we're doing to drive broader awareness of our point of view on the world, what we believe about the world. And then, yes, use that to attract and build an audience that we can hopefully convince at some point to become our customer. And so it's sort of switched on its head. So yeah, I would agree that it's coming back in a way, but it's almost coming back as really the core function of what marketing does, rather than sort of even a side hustle that a marketing team would do.
Yeah. Um, I appreciate that view. For those of us that haven't been in the marketing world for like better part of 25 plus years, how would you have defined marketing when you first kind of got into it, right? I think like I mean, I'm kind of up there too in age, even though I may not look it, but I remember marketing and trying. I always gravitated towards marketing, thinking, like the Nike and the consumer brands, and right, it's like telling these amazing stories through usually commercials of some sort, right, and like being involved in that and thinking about advertising agencies and things. What was marketing like in the earlier days for you, and what got you really excited about it? And then how did you start figuring out this niche of content marketing as you maybe got in a little bit more deeper around it?
I think there's sort of two threads there that we could follow. The first is that, back in the day, this is maybe pre-internet or early days of internet, or, everything, sort of, depending on your sort of lens that you look through the world. Basically, marketing was about how efficiently can we create a customer to our product or service. It's
Yeah.
kind of that simple, right? Reach and frequency, right? How many people do I need to reach to ultimately convince some of them that they should become our customer to our product or service? And what we started to see, really from the disruption of search, right? So in the early days of the internet and Google search, and to whatever extent Bing plays a role here, um, the search engine basically changed the way that we as consumers got information and were entertained, right? We could now go search for our favorite things to do online. We could go search for research. We could go search for information on how to do something. We could search for that thing. And what it encouraged a lot of companies to do in that sort of 2005 to 2010 timeframe was to create a lot of content to be found. It was the birth of inbound marketing. It was the birth of, being found and SEO online. And it was all about creating as much stuff as you could in order for people to find you if they were searching for it. But then what we started to realize was that as we got into 2010, 2012, 2013, 2015, well, one, search was really hard, but
Yep.
two, it really started to become about how do we keep that attention once we have it. In other words, it's not just about finding them when they're in a buying mood, but it's about those people that find us when they're not in a buying mood. So how can we entertain them and inspire them and engage them and teach them so that we have their attention and convince them to get into a buying mood?
Yep.
So the nature of the content we started to create changed really in that sort of 2010 to 2015 timeframe. And then as social media got its, legs underneath it, and we started to see really the decline of SEO as a real sort of focused effort, what we started to see is Once you get those audiences, you want to make sure that you can address them, right? You want to get their email address or their physical address or their text number. So the owned media first party data thing over the last 7 years has become the real switch here. So that's sort of the evolution of where marketing has gone, with how content marketing has sort of provided a much sharper focus on the lens.
I love it. I think of like the dance evolution of things, and it's like you're talking about the marketing evolution of things over trajectory of time. And I think it provides a very like compelling like visual of just through your words of like walking us through what that looks like. Um, yeah, you mentioned kind of like the collection of this data and like owned media, um, which is I think quite a bit of a difference from the former of what you were talking about in the earlier part of the advent of the internet and search specifically. Uh,
Mm.
and I think like especially in the past, like now I feel like the past 2 years, last especially like last year, there's been this shift of focus of what are you servicing through that own media? Like what is the type of content that you're pushing through there? It's evolved and changed a lot. Now that we know that those are viable channels, but it's so noisy in those channels and the attention is so limited. And I think even just from psychological, user behavior pattern is like it just instantaneously, it's like you have to first of all overcome this barrier of trust for them to even like give the attention, right? Because we're already like pre-programmed that whatever's going to be put in front of us is not going to be relevant. And so how do you cut through that first to then get to some form of thing that actually will be relevant so that individuals actually feels rewarded in part of that process and not just like I made a mistake. Um,
It's a great point. Yeah, it's a great point where, and it gets to back to what we were just talking about with that idea of holding the attention, not just
yeah,
capturing the attention, right? Which is, how do you create an audience that wants to spend time with you, even when they're not in, either a buying mood, or if you're selling something that's a considered purchase, like a big enterprise software package or something like that, in between when they're in a buying mood, right? It's because once you've bought this big enterprise software product, well, you're not buying another one for another 5 years, but at some point you are. And so we need to how do we keep your attention and you engaged in all of that? And that becomes the new focus of where our owned media can play a role.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious to your perception on how that's kind of changed, right? I think like because I would say like that Gong, for example, that the sales tool Gong.io does a really good job of like providing and funneling up intelligence from their product to then
Yeah.
the sales community at large and giving them great content pieces. So like even if you're not a customer, you're going there as like a best practice kind of like exercise, or even if you are a customer or already a customer, you're still going back to looking for that for like reports, trend analysis, etc. And they do a great job of that. Um, but also I'm seeing now like these other channels of like LinkedIn influencers and CEOs taking more putting more time and investing more time of building their personal brand to drive revenue for their companies for their company. Um, Thoughts on that? Because these are things I'm starting to see like become much more relevant and also just more in my face in real time.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like there's two questions in there. And the
Yeah.
first is this idea of, and we've seen a huge trend here, and this is especially true in the tech space, startup space, which is a focus on what we call enablement content.
Mm,
In other words, it's content built to help you become a better version of you, right? So, as separated from something like onboarding or training or those
yeah.
kinds of things on the product, how to use it better or how to use it easier, or, what you can do with it and all of that sort of education, but rather enablement content that helps you become a better version of whatever it is you do. Salesforce is a great example of this. HubSpot's a great example of this, where they have, their entire universities where you can be certified and become, a great marketer or a great salesperson or a great database operator or a great developer on that platform by taking their classes and that enablement content. So there's a big room there. And then you have companies like Pendo, which I love what they're doing at Pendo, right? Where they've acquired a community called Mind the Product, and they turned that community into training, events, a community of product managers, and all of the things that they're doing over there, which is just genius, all brought to you by the software product, which of course helps you understand your, the products that you're developing better. So there's that aspect to it. And then you sort of put the lens of social media as well as sort of distributed content, where we start to see that in today's world, with as much misinformation and disinformation as there is out there on social media, it's just a stronger story to have your CEO, your employees, your people tell your story for you than it is for you to tell your brand story there, right? So leveraging my social media strategy nowadays to have my teams say everything I want to say on social media and put a face and a name, especially in a world of AI where it's a trusted human bringing you this value, not just a logo with a sort of cut and paste sort of style of thought leadership. So I think those two things are related for sure, but I think that personality aspect for the social media is what you're getting to when you're seeing that CEO begin to,
Yep,
post.
absolutely. Um, coming in kind of like these fractional marketing roles, uh, is there a step that you go through in the onboarding process to almost like audit a company in terms of like where their immediate needs and priorities need to be, and what's maybe, in your experience of having done that a number of times, um, where there tends to be bigger gaps than others?
Yeah, yeah. It really depends on the company. What I typically find is that when I'm getting a call, it's one of two reasons. One is they're trying to scale and they're trying to figure out how to bring a team that is either been founder led or has been sort of what I would typically call your pro am marketers, right? These are the professional amateur marketers, right? They're sort of marketers in their day job.
Yep.
So this is the CEO or the head of operations or the chief revenue officer or whoever it is in the organization who's kind of doing marketing because they had to, right? And so they want to scale and build a team and build a strategy that is fundamentally sound in marketing, and they need help doing that. And that's more of a longer term type of approach where it's like, great, we're going to come in, we're going to audit what you've got going on, your processes, your technology, how you're taking yourself to market, the stories you're telling, your personas, your buyer's journey, all the things that a classic marketing team would do. And we're going to put together a roadmap to actually figure that out for you. And then the thing is, you make that first phone call, and then you might discover that the second reason they're calling you is we have a problem. We have a big problem in a triage thing that we need to get. We're running out of venture money. We're running out of, we've been decreasing in market share. We've got a churn problem. We've got something we need to triage right away. And so there it's putting together a sprint, a 30, 45, 60, 90-day sprint to solve the triage problem, and then sort of figuring out what the underlying, because not everybody can afford to take that sort of considered pace to build a marketing at scale. Sometimes there's a real emergency that you just got to deal with. So it's either of those two situations, usually, and you just deal with it as it comes up.
Got it. Got it. Um, are there like certain things that I don't know if you have I don't like to use the word playbook necessarily, but maybe there is a universal process that you use to kind of figure out what out of your toolkit are you going to bring to each of those companies based on maybe that assessment.
Yeah, well, there's a structured process to it for sure. Whether or not I would call it a playbook or not, but the sort of structured process is to look at the people, the process, and the technology, right? Of how you're, it was Michael Porter, who was the famous Harvard Business School. He said, when he talked about competitive strategy, he talked about the idea that competitive strategy, and this is especially true in marketing, is not what we put out there. It's the activities that we perform every day, right? It's all the stuff that we do. And so how do you do those things? Because everybody has to do them, right?
Hmm.
Well, there's no secret to marketing activities, like all the things that need to get done. It's how do we do them and who does them? And so those are the real keys to figuring out first. So yeah, there's a structured approach to figuring out what's going on and sort of uncovering the gaps, as it were, to figuring out what needs to get done. But honestly, most companies, and this is true across industry, most companies face the same challenges, right? They're either having an awareness problem where they're quite honestly just not getting their message out loud enough and figuring out how to pierce the noise, or they have a lead generation problem or a nurturing problem where, yeah, they can get people to come to the website or they can get people to do stuff, but they can't. The sales enablement's not there. The reasons to stay are not there. The sort of nurturing programs aren't there, or they have a churn problem, which is basically, yeah, we can get business, but then they go away. They just churn out 30 days later. So whatever that is, given whatever industry they're in, we can usually uncover, the weakest parts of their customer's journey. And
Mhm.
that's the part where we need to focus first and
Yeah.
build that up. Now, I am a big believer in no matter how small you are, that strategic marketing planning, and I know it's kind of gone out of vogue in many cases, but I absolutely believe that classic strategic marketing planning is a core component. I don't care how big your company is. It's just figuring out your total addressable market, figuring out where you can sell, figuring out your pricing strategies, figuring out your distribution strategy. Just classic marketing 101 stuff is truly, truly important. So there is, even in a triage situation, there is a like, let's stop for a minute and figure out what is really the problem here.
Yeah. How much of like how much of like customer like interviews or like customer research is part of that process for you? Um, because sometimes I feel like they're amplifying a message that's falling on deaf ears, and that can be and it doesn't matter if you come in with the best distribution strategy, like you're operating at suboptimal levels because you haven't figured out who the ideal persona is yet, and you haven't figured out the messaging that resonates with that persona.
100%, 100% right. And the way I look at it is that persona development is a process. It's not a
Yeah,
project, right? It's something we continuously should do and get better at because people change. The
yeah.
climate changes, economics change. And so all of those things are an ongoing part of your strategic marketing planning
Your
as you
product
do that.
changes too. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly right. And so, but having said that, you're exactly right. We have to get good enough, right? We have to get good enough information. So, because two things can happen. One is you do none of it, and to your point, you end up not knowing what's resonating or why it's resonating or if it can resonate or what we should do. You don't even know if your target market is big enough. So you don't do any of it and you fail, or you get so wrapped around the axle of trying to get to every individual customer's needs that you sort of don't market. You understand your customer really well, but you're spending so much time figuring out who they are, you never do anything. So there's a balance between the way that you develop a persona in the early days to get good enough to start testing and start learning, but at the same time continually revisiting it so that over time, 3 months, 6 months, a year, your persona development gets even better and better and better.
so it's doing everything in tandem.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Um, Definitely want to cover the topic of just AI, and it's become, a very big topic nowadays. I think
You think a little?
just a little bit. Yeah, obviously, I think going out of last year and into this year, it was a big hot topic, and I think at least what I've been seeing has a lot of, and I think it's as expected because it's kind of like the advent of the internet. It's going to go through growing pain, a boom and bust kind of thing, right? And I think we're going through a phase of a lot of over promising, under delivering, and a lot of these different types of AI tools, which I think is going to be expected. It's
Yeah.
not going to go away anywhere, right? It's just going to get better. But I do also think like the use cases, what we thought maybe like going out into the fourth quarter of last year is very different than what it is today. Like at
Mm,
least the conversations I've had about it. I think a lot of people think of that the human element, they're not as threatened about the attack on the human element and the creative aspect of humans are going to bring to the table. Um, at least not yet. In the immediate short term. But what are your thoughts on it? What have you seen in terms of like maybe the general market's perception of it? Again, in this short time period of like kind of when it's really become mass market adopted, or at least like mass market understanding of it, and or awareness of it, not maybe even
yeah.
under
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I mean, Awareness is not the problem anymore.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it like what you're just saying, it's everywhere. Here's what I would say is that integrated into strategy, integrated into marketing, and we should be clear that I think what we're really talking about here is generative AI, right? So the sort of generative content part of AI, not that which is getting integrated into analytics or in
yeah,
distribution models or in sort of planning kinds of use cases, which has been going
yeah,
gangbusters for years, right?
yeah,
That's well, it's a well-worn path, and it's getting exponentially better, but it's not the generative AI that has become the sort of the hype. And there, I think the integration into marketing, sort of AI is kind of the sexiest thing that nobody's really doing.
yeah,
It's especially true in larger organizations, but true in smaller organizations. Individuals are playing, right? They're playing around with Claude or with ChatGPT or with a Bard or whatever Google's name for AI is these days. So they're playing
Gemini.
around with these things, and they're rewriting content, or they're coming up with the ideas that are 60% there, or they're playing around at the individual level. But the teams themselves, either because their IT and legal departments are going, slow your roll on that, right? Just, make sure that we're where we are with copyrights and all that,
Mm,
or simply because they haven't figured it out, right? They just haven't figured out where it plays the biggest role. So right now, I think for derivative content, things like abstracts, summaries of meetings, the kinds of things that are, getting where it's just pattern recognition, right? Where it's
yeah,
literally just looking at content and saying, here's a summary of it, or here's a rewritten version of it, or here's a translated version of it. Translation and localization is probably my favorite use case for it. But
yeah,
other than that, sort of
absolutely.
re-expressing content in shorter or longer or different language kinds of ways, I think the origination of ideas and content through AI is pretty limited at this point,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean, there's the six-fingered stuff, on ChatGPT and DALL-E and, melting faces and all that kind of stuff. And AI art certainly has a look to it.
sure.
And I don't really worry about that replacing any human designers or writers in the short term for sure.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Um, I guess like in terms of, where the landscape of just the marketing world right now sits. I know you work with a plethora of different size and stage of companies and probably verticals. Um, what are some of the things that you see yourself maybe like saying on repeat, like right now, in terms of things that they should be doing, things that they should be action items to be prioritizing?
I think the biggest one that I have to point to, it goes back to what we talked about at the top of the show, which is this idea of owned media and building audiences, right? So if there's one thing that we know is that search is broken. Google search is broken, and SEO is in a really weird place right now when it comes to chaos. So us being found, you just can't depend on it any longer.
Hmm.
The other thing that we know and that we can count on is that the walled gardens are getting higher walls around them, right? So whether that's Google's ecosystem or Meta's ecosystem or Amazon's ecosystem or Microsoft's ecosystem, basically all these ecosystems are becoming higher walled gardens, with access to the audiences that we want to reach. And so what we have to be able to do, if we don't want to pay that tax, the Google tax, the LinkedIn tax, the Meta tax that is on top of reaching our audiences, is we have to start to build addressability. We have to get people interested in signing up to what it is we have to offer.
Yep.
And so the focus on first party data and the use of that in marketing and developing better experiences for our customers, the focus on owned media is something I think every marketing department, independent of how big your company is first and foremost in 2024. That to me is the first and foremost thing. Secondary to that is the human element. I think because of where AI is right now, the human element of content and putting faces, with real names, with real content is a differentiator these days. And so I think that would be my second thing, is to get people in your organization creating content, not necessarily the company itself.
Awesome. Um, I think that's a great way to end it. I think that's a great piece of advice. And we're up on time anyways. But I want to say thank you for just sharing your experiences and just again sharing your insights, and visibility into just the way that you think towards marketing, and dumbing down maybe like the past 25 plus years that you've been in that space and sharing us the timeline of that is really insightful.
Well, I appreciate it, Chris, very much. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, thank you.